The Mafia Boss never once looked at the fat night guard until she blocked the elevator and saved his life in silence. She had saved his life 3 times. The first time, he had been annoyed. The second time, he had not even registered it. The third time, he stood in a marble lobby at 2 a.m. reading a file that had turned everything he thought he knew about his own organization inside out, and he understood, with the specific and devastating clarity of a man confronting something he cannot argue with, that the woman sitting behind the security desk 20 feet away from him, the woman he had walked past for 3 years without once registering her face, was the most loyal person in the entire structure he had built. He walked toward her. She looked up from her monitors with the calm, unhurried expression of someone who had been expecting this conversation for a long time and had simply been waiting for him to be ready for it. He had spent 3 years looking through her. He spent the next 10 minutes trying to understand who she was. And he spent considerably longer than that understanding what it meant that she had never once asked him to look. Maggie Okafor had learned, early and thoroughly, that the world sorted people into 2 categories. There were the people the world looked at, and there were the people the world looked through. By the time she was 12, she had understood which category she occupied. By the time she was 22 and had graduated from John Jay College of Criminal Justice with a degree in security management and a minor in behavioral analysis, she had decided that her category was not a disadvantage. It was, if managed correctly, an operational asset of considerable value. She was 31 now, and she had been managing it correctly for long enough that it had become something close to a philosophy. She had grown up in the Flatbush section of Brooklyn, the second of 4 children of a nurse and an electrician who had emigrated from Lagos in 1989 with the specific, practical ambition of people who understood that the distance between one life and another was made of discipline and time rather than luck. Her parents had raised their children with a set of values so consistent and so clearly articulated that Margaret sometimes thought of them as an operating system, the invisible architecture beneath everything she did. Work carefully, pay attention. Do not confuse what you are given with what you are worth. Do not confuse what others see with what you are. She had been, from a very early age, a person who paid attention. Not the performative attention of someone seeking recognition for their perceptiveness, but the quiet, structural attention of someone for whom observation was as natural as breathing, a way of processing the world that preceded conscious decision and operated independently of whether anyone was watching her watch. She noticed the specific way her 3rd-grade teacher's voice changed register when she was covering material she found boring, and the way it sharpened when she reached the parts she genuinely cared about. She noticed that the bodega on her corner had a delivery schedule that could be predicted with 90% accuracy from the supplier's truck parking patterns on the adjacent block. She noticed, at 15, that the boy in her building who was 3 years older and presented himself as entirely unremarkable was conducting a very careful ongoing survey of which neighbors were home at which hours, and she told her mother, who told the building super, and the subsequent investigation confirmed that 3 apartments had been entered during the periods he had mapped. She had not been thanked for this. The information had simply been absorbed into the mechanisms of consequence, and the boy was gone, and life continued. She had been slightly surprised by the absence of acknowledgement, and then she had not been surprised at all, because she had already begun to understand the pattern. People who moved through the world quietly, who saw things from the margins rather than the center, whose observations arrived without the social packaging that made them legible to people accustomed to information delivered in certain registers. Those people were not acknowledged. Their contributions were absorbed without attribution. This was not malice. It was simply the operational reality of a world that processed information from some sources more readily than others. Margaret had decided, at 17, that this was not a problem she needed to solve. It was a condition she needed to work within. You did not stop the rain by being angry about it. You built accordingly. John Jay had suited her with the precision of something designed for a specific purpose. The security management curriculum was rigorous and practical in equal measure, heavy on behavioral analysis and threat assessment, and the specific discipline of identifying pattern deviations before they became incidents. Her instructors had used words like systematic, methodical, and thorough in her evaluations, and she had taken these as the most accurate descriptions anyone had ever applied to her, more accurate and more useful than the words that had occasionally been used in other contexts. Intimidating, difficult, too intense, the specific vocabulary of people who found focused attention uncomfortable when it was directed at them rather than on their behalf. She had graduated third in her class and accepted a position with a mid-tier security firm that serviced commercial properties across Lower Manhattan. She had worked that position for 3 years, in which time she had identified 11 significant security vulnerabilities in properties under her firm's management, prevented 2 incidents that would have resulted in significant property loss, and been passed over for promotion 4 times in favor of candidates with less experience and considerably stronger social relationships with the people doing the promoting. She had left without bitterness. Bitterness was an inefficient emotion, expensive and structurally non-load-bearing. She had simply assessed the environment, concluded that it did not serve her operational goals, and moved. The position at Callisto Tower had come through a standard commercial security placement: night shift, lobby management, building monitoring, incident response. The salary was modest, the hours were solitary. The building was, from the outside, simply another high-rise commercial property in the mid-50s of Manhattan, undistinguished except by the quality of its stone and the particular silence of its lobby after midnight. Margaret had known within her second week exactly what kind of building it was. She had known because she paid attention, and because paying attention in that lobby, at those hours, to the specific quality of the people who moved through it, and the specific nature of the business conducted in its upper floors, told a story that was entirely legible to someone who had learned to read it. She was not naive about what she had placed herself adjacent to. She had made a deliberate, considered decision to take the position and remain in it, and that decision was not made in ignorance. It was made with the understanding that a building like this, a building that served this function, managed by an organization with these structures, was precisely the kind of environment that generated the specific patterns she was trained to read. The ordinary commercial properties of Lower Manhattan had given her 11 vulnerabilities in 3 years. She suspected this building would offer considerably more. She had been correct. And what she had found, as the months accumulated and the picture sharpened, was something considerably more specific and considerably more urgent than a general security vulnerability. What she had found was a threat that was organized, patient, and internal. And what she had understood, once she understood this, was that the man it was directed at had no idea it existed. The Callisto Tower stood 43 stories above the corner of 54th and Lexington, and it had been the address of Russo Holdings since its construction 14 years prior. Russo Holdings was described in its public filings as a diversified investment and real estate development firm with interests across the northeastern corridor. This description was accurate in the way that a photograph of the surface of the ocean is accurate. It showed you something real, but it communicated nothing meaningful about the depth and the temperature and the specific nature of the things that moved through the water below. Dominic Russo was 41 years old. He was the third-generation head of a family organization that had survived prohibition, 2 federal indictments, a catastrophic internal restructuring in 1987, and the specific pressures of operating in a city that never stopped generating both opportunity and threat in roughly equal measure. He was not described in public documents in any terms beyond his role as chief executive of Russo Holdings. In the particular world he actually inhabited, he was described in considerably more specific terms, always spoken at a register that acknowledged the cost of carelessness. He was also, from Margaret's operational perspective, a man of absolute and entirely predictable routine. He arrived at the building between 11:15 and 11:30 every evening, after the last of the day's legitimate business had concluded and the less visible portion of his professional life required his attention. He departed between 2 and 3 in the morning. He used the private elevator on the north side of the lobby exclusively. He was accompanied by 2 bodyguards when he arrived and 2 different bodyguards when he departed, the rotation designed to prevent pattern setting in his personal security. He wore dark suits every night without variation. He had never, in 3 years, looked directly at Maggie Okafor as he crossed the lobby. This did not surprise her. She had studied the behavioral patterns of powerful men extensively, both academically and through the particular curriculum of 3 years spent watching them move through a lobby at midnight. And what she had identified as the universal constant was this: powerful men did not look at things they had already categorized. Categorization, for men like Dominic Russo, was a rapid and largely unconscious process, a survival mechanism refined over years of operating in environments where misreading a person could be fatal. The man at the security desk was staff. Staff was infrastructure. Infrastructure did not require attention. The fact that the person at the security desk was a woman, and a large one, 5'6", 260 pounds, with the broad shoulders and solid build of someone whose body prioritized function over decoration, made the categorization faster and more complete. Margaret understood this not with bitterness, but with the clear-eyed acknowledgement of someone who had decided that other people's perceptual failures were not her problem to manage. Her problem was the building. And the building, she had concluded 6 months into the job, had a problem. She had identified the first anomaly in her 4th month, a delivery schedule that did not align with the building's logged vendor contracts. Small, easily explained away, the kind of irregularity that anyone less methodical would have absorbed into the general background noise of managing a 43-story commercial property. Margaret did not absorb irregularities. She documented them. She documented them in a personal notebook she kept in the inner pocket of her security blazer, not in the building's official incident log. Because by the time she had identified the second anomaly, a maintenance request filed by an internal account number that did not correspond to any registered department, she had understood that whatever was happening in this building was happening with the cooperation of at least one person who had access to the official systems. She was precise about what she could and could not claim to know. She could not claim to know that the anomalies were connected. She could not claim to know that they pointed toward a specific threat rather than the ordinary administrative looseness of a large commercial property with multiple overlapping management structures. What she could claim was that 2 independent irregularities had occurred within 30 days of each other, that both involved information systems she would have expected to be tightly controlled in a building of this type, and that the behavioral signatures of the people associated with each irregularity were inconsistent with their stated roles in ways she could not yet articulate, but could not dismiss. She had worked in security long enough to trust the specific discomfort that arose when something was wrong before she could say what. That discomfort was not intuition in any mystical sense. It was pattern recognition operating faster than conscious analysis, the product of years of training and experience, producing a signal before the reasoning caught up. She had learned to take the signal seriously and then do the work of finding out what it was signaling. She spent the next 3 months doing the work. She cross-referenced delivery logs against vendor contracts. She mapped access patterns for the building's maintenance systems against the schedules of the staff authorized to use them. She noted which elevators were used at which hours by which categories of personnel, and she noted the deviations. She observed the specific behavioral grammar of every person who entered the building after 10 in the evening, and she built, piece by careful piece, a picture of the building's nighttime operational reality that was considerably more detailed and considerably more troubling than anything in the official security documentation. She did not go to building management with this. She did not go to Russo Holdings' internal security division. She thought about going to Dominic Russo directly, and she rejected this option for the same reason she rejected all the others. She could not prove anything. She had patterns. She had anomalies. She had the kind of cumulative behavioral evidence that was entirely compelling to someone trained to read it and entirely dismissible to someone who was not. What she had, above all, was the absolute certainty that if she said the wrong thing to the wrong person, she would be fired before the end of her shift. And then she would not be in the building. And then whatever was building in the spaces between the anomalies would have no one watching it. So she watched. She watched for 8 more months. She built a picture, one careful piece at a time, from her position behind the security desk in the north lobby at 11:15 every evening, with the calm patience of someone who understood that the value of being invisible was that you could see everything. The picture she built was not complete. There were significant gaps, sections where the pattern suggested something she could not yet verify, connections she could feel the shape of without being able to name them. But what she could see clearly enough, by the time 14 months had passed, was this. Dominic Russo was going to be killed. It was going to happen in this building, on a route he used every night, and it was going to be arranged by someone who knew his schedule well enough to plan around his security rotation. She could not prove who. She could not prove when. She could not go to anyone inside the organization without risking the information reaching the person responsible. What she could do was watch the lobby, watch the elevator banks, watch the people who moved through the building after hours with the specific behavioral signatures of people who were somewhere they were not supposed to be, performing tasks that required them to appear as though they were doing something else. And when those people appeared, she could act, quietly, without explanation, in ways that could be attributed to routine security procedure or simple coincidence, so that if she was wrong, if she had misread the pattern, no one would ever know she had intervened at all. The first time was on a Tuesday in September, 14 months before the night everything changed. She'd been watching the parking structure feed for 20 minutes when she registered it. A vehicle in Bay 7 that had been stationary for 3 hours, not unusual in itself, vehicles were occasionally left overnight. But its positioning had shifted by approximately 8 feet between the 9 o'clock feed and the 11:15 feed. A vehicle does not shift position without an engine. An engine does not run in a parking structure for 3 hours without producing a carbon monoxide signature that would trigger the ventilation alarms. The ventilation alarms had not triggered, which meant the vehicle had been moved manually, pushed into a new position. The new position placed it directly in the path of the route Dominic Russo used to reach his car from the building's private parking entrance. Margaret considered this for 11 seconds. Then she picked up the internal phone, called the lobby desk of the adjacent elevator bank, and told the night maintenance supervisor that she had a pipe pressure warning on the 3rd subfloor that required immediate inspection of the main corridor between the parking structure and the private entrance. The maintenance supervisor, who was new and did not yet have the confidence to question a security flag he did not fully understand, agreed to redirect through the alternate route. Dominic Russo's bodyguard received the redirect instruction from building staff and adjusted their exit accordingly. 20 minutes after Dominic's car left the structure via the alternate exit, the vehicle in Bay 7 detonated. The subsequent investigation attributed the explosion to a fuel leak in an older model vehicle that had been improperly parked. The finding was accepted. The case was closed. Margaret added a note to her personal notebook. She had not been wrong about the pattern. She returned to her desk and continued her shift. The second incident was 22 months before the night everything changed, which meant it occurred 8 months after the first, which meant the pattern was accelerating. She had identified the shooter by their shoes. This was not as improbable as it sounded. Margaret had spent 3 years studying the specific behavioral grammar of people who moved through building lobbies at night, and one of the things she had internalized was that people who were performing a role, pretending to belong somewhere they did not belong, almost always managed their face and their posture and their documentation correctly. What they failed to manage consistently was the granular details, the small things. The shoes worn by a man presenting himself as a telecommunications contractor did not match the worn, practical footwear of someone who climbed into infrastructure spaces on a daily basis. They were clean, slightly too clean, with the specific sole compression of someone who spent their working hours seated, not moving through confined spaces on their knees. She watched him take the service elevator to the roof access level. She watched the timestamp. She calculated the sightlines from the rooftop of the building to the main entrance of Callisto Tower, which she had mapped 6 months prior, because mapping sightlines was the kind of thing Maggie Okafor did with her evenings off. Dominic Russo was due to exit through the main entrance in 4 minutes. She walked to the lobby's building management terminal, pulled up the maintenance schedule, and logged an emergency inspection flag on the main entrance vestibule, citing a moisture detection reading from the exterior sensor panel. The flag automatically triggered a redirect notification to the building's private security channel, which the bodyguard team monitored. Dominic exited through the service entrance on the south side instead. The man on the roof waited for 11 minutes. Then he left. Margaret logged the telecommunications contractor's badge number, noted the discrepancy in his footwear, and added 2 pages to her notebook. She did not sleep well for the following week, not because she was frightened, but because the pattern was now unambiguous, and unambiguous patterns had a momentum to them that she could not interrupt indefinitely through lobby management and maintenance flags. Eventually, the person responsible would adapt, would vary the method, would use something she could not redirect from a security desk. She needed more information. She needed to know who was behind it so that she could understand the shape of the threat well enough to counter it effectively. She spent the next 14 months watching. On the last Friday of November, at 11:47 in the evening, 2 men arrived in the lobby of Callisto Tower, carrying the identification and equipment of a licensed elevator maintenance company. Margaret checked their credentials against the building's maintenance schedule the moment they stepped through the door. The credentials were flawless. The company was real, licensed, with a 3-year service contract with the building. The work order number was valid. None of this was what she was looking at. She was looking at the way the taller one held his equipment case. It was the grip of someone managing weight distribution with conscious effort, the specific adjustment a person makes when a case contains something considerably heavier and more awkwardly shaped than standard elevator maintenance equipment. And she was looking at the way the shorter one positioned himself in the lobby, not next to the elevator bank they were ostensibly there to service, but at a 45-degree angle to the north lobby entrance, with a direct sightline to the door Dominic Russo would come through in approximately 22 minutes. She noted the time. She noted the positioning. She noted that these 2 men had arrived with a valid work order for the south elevator bank and had walked directly to the north bank without any apparent awareness that they had done so, which suggested that the north bank was their actual destination and the work order was designed to explain their presence in the building, not their location within it. She picked up her radio. She did not call for backup. Backup meant involving building security management, and building security management reported to a department head who reported to an operations director who she had flagged in her notebook 14 months ago as someone whose behavioral patterns were inconsistent with their stated role in ways she could not yet quantify, but had not dismissed. She called the elevator maintenance line instead, the building's own elevator maintenance contractor. She told them she had a pressure irregularity reading on the north bank and needed to initiate a service lockdown pending inspection. The automated lockdown protocol for the north elevator bank engaged at 11:51. At 11:53, Dominic Russo came through the lobby entrance. He moved toward the north elevator bank with the habitual efficiency of a man who had taken the same route every night for years. His bodyguards flanked him at their standard 2-pace distance. Margaret stood up. She pressed the manual override for the North Bank lockdown and held it. She said in a voice that was entirely level and entirely clear, "Mr. Russo, I need you to wait, please." Dominic Russo stopped. He turned. He looked at her for the first time in 3 years, not the absent, categorizing glance of someone confirming that the infrastructure was in its expected position, but an actual look, the sharp, focused attention of a man whose survival instincts had fired. He was not accustomed to being stopped in his own building. "What?" he said. It was not a question. It was the single syllable of a man deciding in real time whether what was happening was an inconvenience or a threat. "There is a service issue with the North Bank," Margaret said. "I need you to wait." "There is no service issue with the North Bank," he said. His voice had dropped to the register that his people would have recognized immediately as the register that preceded consequences. "I use that elevator every night." "I know," she said. "Please wait." His lead bodyguard had stepped forward. He was a large man named Carver, who Margaret had catalogued as competent and loyal, and somewhat short on patience with situations he could not immediately classify. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who was 2 seconds from reclassifying the situation in a direction that would not benefit her. "Ma'am," Carver said. 40 seconds, Margaret said to Dominic Russo. She looked at him steadily, without apology and without flinching. "Please." Something in his face shifted. It was very small. The specific fractional recalibration of a man who has read enough rooms in his life to recognize, in the stillness of another person, the difference between obstruction and warning. He waited. At 11:56, 4 minutes after the lockdown engaged, 2 members of the building's contracted security team, not Margaret's team, the operations director's team, arrived in the north lobby in response to a silent alarm that Margaret had triggered from her desk 30 seconds after the 2 maintenance men had walked through the door. The 2 maintenance men had not left the elevator lobby. They were still there when security arrived. The equipment case contained a firearm and a disruption device designed to disable the building's camera system for a 90-second window. The work order was traced to a company that existed on paper and had a legitimate license, but had never performed a single day of actual elevator maintenance. The 2 men were taken from the building in handcuffs. Dominic Russo stood in the north lobby for a long moment after they were gone. Then he looked at Margaret, who had returned to her desk and was completing her incident report with the methodical thoroughness she brought to all documentation. He said nothing. He took the south elevator to his floor. Margaret finished her report. She noted the time. She added 3 pages to her personal notebook. She did not go home when her shift ended. She sat at her desk and she thought for a long time about what would happen next, because she understood, with the clarity that came from having watched this pattern for 2.5 years, that the 3rd failed attempt meant one of 2 things. Either the person responsible would stop, which was unlikely, because in her experience, people who had committed this deeply to a course of action did not stop. They adapted. Or Dominic Russo would begin asking questions that would eventually reach the right answer. She thought about what it would mean when they did. Then she organized her notebook, placed it in the inner pocket of her blazer, and waited. If you are sitting with the question that is sitting inside this story right now, if you need to know who is behind 3 attempts on Dominic Russo's life, and why a night guard who could have spoken up chose instead to act in silence, then you are exactly where this channel wants you. Subscribe right now and hit the notification bell, because what comes next in this story is the part that will change everything. We will be here. Do not miss it. At 1:47 in the morning, Dominic Russo came back down. Margaret heard the south elevator before she saw him. She had memorized the sound of every elevator in the building, the specific mechanical signature of each one, the differences in their descent rhythms that told her which floor they were coming from and how fast. The south elevator arriving at the lobby level at 1:47 meant he had been upstairs for 1 hour and 51 minutes, which was considerably longer than his usual departure window. She had known he would come back. She had not known when or in what state, whether the hour and 51 minutes had produced clarity or the specific kind of controlled fury that powerful men sometimes wore when something had shaken them and they needed to place the shaking somewhere. She had prepared herself for both because preparation was the specific habit she had that she trusted most. He crossed the lobby with 2 bodyguards and stopped at her desk. Carver was not with him tonight. The men flanking him were part of the internal team she recognized as his personal detail, not the building security rotation. They positioned themselves at the outer edges of the lobby with the practiced discretion of professionals who understood when a conversation was private. Dominic Russo placed a file on her desk. It was a personnel file. Her personnel file, she understood from the header, visible at the top of the first page. She did not reach for it. He had been thorough. In 1 hour and 51 minutes, he had obtained her complete employment record from the building's HR system, her John Jay transcripts, her previous employment history, and, she noted the additional pages at the back, records she would not have expected him to have access to through standard channels, which told her something about the specific depth of the resources he had directed at this question in the past 2 hours. He had not, she observed, slept. The particular quality of controlled wakefulness that very tired people in very high-stakes situations produced was one she had catalogued extensively, and she recognized it now in the faint compression around his eyes and the almost imperceptible deliberateness of his posture, the slight additional work of holding himself to his habitual standard when the ordinary resources for it had been depleted. He had spent 2 hours reading about her. She had spent 3 years watching him. She was not certain these quantities were equivalent, but she noted them both. He sat down in the chair on the other side of her desk. The chair was not designed for guests. It was a plain institutional seat that the previous night guard had pulled from a storage corridor 3 years ago, and that no one had ever bothered to replace with something more appropriate, because no one sat in it. He sat in it with the complete, unself-conscious ease of a man who did not register the quality of furniture he was sitting on, because he had never needed to. He looked at her. He did not look through her. He did not perform the absent scan and categorize that had characterized every previous passage through her lobby. He looked at her with the full, comprehensive attention of a man who had spent 2 hours reading a file and was now looking at the person the file described, with the specific quality of someone trying to reconcile 2 images that had not previously seemed like they should belong to the same subject. "I've been going through the incident reports from the past 22 months, he said. "All right," she said. "The parking structure fire in September of last year. Your maintenance flag." "Yes." "The main entrance redirect in January. your sensor report. Yes. Tonight. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. He had, she noted, very still hands. The hands of someone who had learned to manage the involuntary physical expressions of internal states, because involuntary expressions were information, and information in his world was a resource too valuable to give away accidentally. 3 times, he said. Yes. You intervened 3 times. You did not report it. You did not flag it through the security division. You did not come to me. No. Why? Margaret looked at him. She had thought about this question for a long time, in the abstract, in the hours between the first incident and the second, in the longer hours between the second and the third. She had composed various versions of the answer, more diplomatic ones, more careful ones, versions that managed his ego while still conveying the necessary content. She had discarded all of them, because Dominic Russo was not a man who benefited from managed information, and because she had spent 3 years watching him, and what she had concluded from 3 years of watching him was that he was, beneath the layers of operational armor, someone who respected precision. Because you would not have listened to me, she said. It landed in the space between them with the particular weight of a true thing, said plainly. Not cruel, not bitter. Factual, in the way that the temperature of a room is factual. He did not deny it immediately, which told her something. Explain that, he said. A security guard at the front desk flags a behavioral anomaly she cannot fully document, and asks to speak with you directly about a potential threat to your life from inside your organization. She held his gaze without difficulty. Walk me through what would have happened. He was quiet. I would have been referred to your security division, she said. Your security division would have assessed my information, found it inconclusive, and recommended monitoring protocols. I would have been thanked and returned to my desk. The person responsible would have been informed that a security guard had raised concerns, and I would have been removed from the building within 2 weeks for a reason that had nothing to do with the concerns I raised. He looked at her for a long moment. You believed someone in the security division was involved, he said. I believed someone with access to your operational information was involved. I did not know who. I could not prove who. I knew that if I said the wrong thing to the wrong person, I would lose my position in this building. And if I lost my position in this building, I could not watch what I had been watching. So you said nothing. I said nothing. And instead, you intercepted 3 separate attempts on my life using maintenance flags and sensor reports and elevator lockdown protocols. Yes. He was quiet again. This silence had a different texture from the previous ones. Not the silence of a man formulating a response, but the silence of a man sitting with something he had not anticipated sitting with. She had seen this quality of silence before, in people who had received information that required them to revise a significant assumption. It was usually followed by one of 2 things: acceptance or resistance. She waited to see which this would be. 22 months, he said. 26, she said. From the date I identified the first anomaly. The first incident was 14 months in. He looked at the file. He looked at the chair he was sitting in. He looked at the security desk, the monitors behind her, the lobby around them. You have been in this building, he said, for 3 years. Yes. You have sat at this desk every night for 3 years. 5 nights a week, she said. Standard rotation. And in 3 years, he said, I have walked through this lobby 412 times, she said. Based on your standard schedule and accounting for the periods when you were traveling or operating from alternate locations. He stopped. You counted, he said. I count everything, she said. It is how I work. Something shifted in his face. It was a small shift, almost imperceptible. The kind of internal adjustment that produced no dramatic external change, but altered the quality of everything that followed it. He was, she understood, reassessing. Not just the specific situation, the 3 incidents, the notebook, the information she had given him, but something larger. Something about the architecture of what he thought he knew about his own building, his own organization, his own capacity to see what was in front of him. He picked up her personnel file and set it aside. Tell me, he said, about Ferrante. All right, she said. The parking structure fire in September of last year. Your maintenance flag. Yes. The main entrance redirect in January. Your sensor report. Yes. Tonight. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. He had, she noted, very still hands. The hands of someone who had learned to manage the involuntary physical expressions of internal states, because involuntary expressions were information, and information in his world was a resource too valuable to give away accidentally. 3 times, he said. Yes. You intervened 3 times. You did not report it. You did not flag it through the security division. You did not come to me. No. Why? Margaret looked at him. She had thought about this question for a long time, in the abstract, in the hours between the first incident and the second, in the longer hours between the second and the third. She had composed various versions of the answer, more diplomatic ones, more careful ones, versions that managed his ego while still conveying the necessary content. She had discarded all of them, because Dominic Rousseau was not a man who benefited from managed information, and because she had spent 3 years watching him, and what she had concluded from 3 years of watching him was that he was, beneath the layers of operational armor, someone who respected precision. Because you would not have listened to me, she said. It landed in the space between them with the particular weight of a true thing said plainly. Not cruel, not bitter. Factual, in the way that the temperature of a room is factual. He did not deny it immediately, which told her something. Explain that, he said. A security guard at the front desk flags a behavioral anomaly she cannot fully document and asks to speak with you directly about a potential threat to your life from inside your organization. She held his gaze without difficulty. Walk me through what would have happened. He was quiet. I would have been referred to your security division, she said. Your security division would have assessed my information, found it inconclusive, and recommended monitoring protocols. I would have been thanked and returned to my desk. The person responsible would have been informed that a security guard had raised concerns, and I would have been removed from the building within 2 weeks for a reason that had nothing to do with the concerns I raised. He looked at her for a long moment. You believed someone in the security division was involved, he said. I believed someone with access to your operational information was involved. I did not know who. I could not prove who. I knew that if I said the wrong thing to the wrong person, I would lose my position in this building. And if I lost my position in this building, I could not watch what I had been watching. So you said nothing. I said nothing. And instead, you intercepted 3 separate attempts on my life using maintenance flags and sensor reports and elevator lockdown protocols. Yes. He leaned back in the chair. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, which she recognized as the gesture of a man processing something that was requiring significant internal reorganization. Who, he said. Who do you think was behind it? I do not know who arranged the attempts, she said. I know who provided the operational information that made them possible. He looked at her again. Your schedule is not public, she said. Your elevator preferences, your departure times, your security rotation patterns, that information is held by a very small number of people within your organization. I've been tracking the specific information that each incident required. There is one access profile that is consistent across all three. One person who knew enough to plan each attempt around your actual movements, rather than your publicly known patterns. She reached into the inner pocket of her blazer and removed the notebook. She placed it on the desk beside the personnel file. He looked at it. 26 months of documentation, she said. Dates, times, behavioral observations, access log cross-references, credential irregularities. It is not complete. There are gaps I could not fill from the security desk, but it is enough to give your people somewhere to start. He did not touch the notebook immediately. He looked at it for a moment, with the expression of a man who was calculating rapidly the implications of what he was looking at. Then he said, "You have been carrying this for 26 months." "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." "Without telling anyone?" "I told you," she said, 3 times. In the only language I was certain you could not dismiss or redirect or have referred to someone who might not be safe." The lobby was very quiet. The building at 2 in the morning had a particular quality of silence, not empty exactly, but suspended, the ordinary activity of the city reduced to a distant hum that made the space feel both larger and more intimate than it did during operational hours. Dominic Russo picked up the notebook. He opened it. He read the first page. His face was very still, but Margaret had spent 3 years developing a granular understanding of the specific ways that stillness could carry different kinds of weight, and what she was reading in his face now was not the controlled blankness of a man managing his reactions. It was the specific, unguarded stillness of a man who has just understood something that has moved the ground beneath him. He turned pages. He read for 8 minutes without speaking. When he closed the notebook, he set it very carefully on the desk, with the deliberate gentleness of someone handling something more significant than its physical weight suggests. "Ferrante," he said. It was not a question. His voice, saying the name, had the quality of a door closing, the specific sound of something being sealed permanently. Margaret did not confirm or deny. She had not confirmed or denied anything in this conversation that was not directly asked of her. 20 years, he said, more to himself than to her. The 2 words carried a weight she did not intrude on. 20 years of shared risk, shared history, the specific and irreplaceable intimacy of men who had built something dangerous together and survived every threat that came from outside it. The weight of a betrayal that long in the making was not something that could be processed quickly or cleanly. She gave him the silence it required. He was quiet for a long moment. "Martinelli," he said then. "His operations coordinator." "Yes," she said. "The access logs I could reach from my position show a consistent pattern across all 3 incidents. The information required to plan around your schedule and your security rotation was accessed from Martinelli's account in the relevant windows prior to each attempt. Whether Ferrante directed that access is a question your people are better equipped to answer than I am. But the pattern is consistent enough that I am confident the investigation will find what it needs to find." He looked at the notebook. He looked at her. "Why did you stay?" he said. 3 years at this desk. You have a degree. You have training. The salary of this position. I was where I needed to be, she said. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have, she said. This building needed watching. I was the person watching it. That is the complete answer. He studied her face with the full, unguarded attention she had observed him giving to information he considered important. The look she had seen directed at Stavros Melas across a table. at documents he read with the concentration of someone storing every detail. He had never directed it at her before. She found it neither uncomfortable nor flattering. It was simply accurate, finally, to what she was. "You do not know me," he said. "You have never spoken to me. I have walked past you for 3 years without—" He stopped. "Without looking," she said. "Yes, I know. That does not bother you." She considered this with genuine care, as she considered everything that deserved it. "It was operationally useful," she said. "People do not guard their behavior around things they do not see. I have learned more about this building from the position of something invisible than I would have learned from any other position available to me." He was quiet for a long time. "My father used to say," he said finally, "that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone else has decided is not worth watching." "Your father was correct," Margaret said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It did not quite become a smile. It did not travel far enough, but it carried the structural elements of one, the specific configuration of a face discovering unexpectedly that it has been given something it did not know to ask for. He stood. He straightened his jacket with the automatic precision of a man who had worn good suits long enough that the gesture was entirely unconscious. Margaret opened the drawer of her desk and removed a single sheet of paper. She placed it on the desk between them. He looked at it. It was a resignation letter, dated that morning before her shift. Typed, printed, signed. Effective immediately upon acceptance. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "Why?" he said.
"My work here is finished," she said. "What I was watching for has been identified. What needed to be prevented has been prevented. You have the notebook. Your people will be able to complete the investigation without me." She kept her voice even. "There is nothing left for me to do from this desk." He reached out and picked up the letter. He read it. He folded it once along its existing crease, and then he tore it in half. Margaret looked at the 2 pieces of paper in his hands. "That document," she began, "is no longer operative," he said. He set the 2 halves on the desk. "I need someone in this building who understands it better than anyone else. Someone who watches it the way it needs to be watched. Someone who has already demonstrated, repeatedly and without any expectation of recognition, that they will do what needs to be done regardless of whether anyone is looking." He paused. "I am aware that I am considerably late to this conversation. I am also aware that I cannot undo 3 years. What I can do is ensure that the next 3 are different." Margaret looked at the torn letter. She looked at him. "What exactly are you proposing?" she said. "I am proposing," he said, "that we have a longer conversation, not here, not tonight. Tomorrow, in my office, at a time that is reasonable for a person who works nights." He paused. "I am also proposing that for the remainder of tonight, you allow me to have someone bring you a coffee, since I imagine the last several hours have been demanding, regardless of how little you are showing it." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "I drink it black," she said. "I will ensure that is communicated," he said. He crossed to the lobby exit. At the door he stopped. He did not turn fully, just enough to be heard. "The notebook," he said. "You did not have to give it to me. You could have walked out of here tonight with 26 months of documentation and used it for any number of things." "I am aware of that," she said. "Why didn't you?" She looked at him across the empty lobby, the marble floor between them, the chandeliers dimmed to their overnight setting above, the building quiet and still around them. "Because it was yours," she said. "The information belongs to the person it was gathered to protect. I was keeping it until you were ready to receive it."
That is all. He stood in the doorway for a moment. The city was behind him, orange and silent. The lobby was in front of him, marble and light. She could not read his expression from this distance, which was unusual for her. She noted it. Then he left. Margaret sat at her desk. She looked at the two halves of her resignation letter.
She straightened them, stacked them neatly, and placed them in the bin beside her desk. She looked at the security monitors. The building was still. Every camera, every corridor, every entrance and exit exactly as it should be. She picked up her pen. She opened a new page in a fresh notebook. The old one had gone with him, as it should have. And she began, as she always began, with the time and the date and a clean, precise account of what she had observed. The building needed watching. She was the person watching it. Some things did not change. And some things, the important ones, the ones that had seemed fixed and permanent and beyond the reach of a single woman at a security desk in the middle of the night, changed completely, without announcement, in the space of a conversation at 2 a.m. in an empty marble lobby. She noted the time. She wrote, "All clear." And then she settled in for the rest of her shift, in the building she knew better than anyone, watching the building she had protected for 3 years, with the specific, unhurried attention of someone who understood that the most important work was always the work that no one saw. If this story reached something in you, if you felt the weight of 3 years of silent, unacknowledged loyalty, and the moment when it was finally seen, then you are home on this channel. We tell stories about the people the world overlooks and the moments when they step forward and change everything. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Share this one with someone who needs to be reminded that being overlooked is not the same as being powerless. The next story is already waiting for you.